talking a little bit about diversifying income stream, can we get at a glance summary of your portfolio careers, starting with you, Adam?
With respects to diversifying,
just what are the moving parts? What are you spending time doing on work in a typical month or week, and what kind of proportions?
So I think my main gig is working here at DBS as the industry liaison. And then I work here 2.5 days a week, and then I have the rest of the time to put into music. I usually spend my Thursday and Friday definitely writing music, and then if I have the capacity to, Saturday, Sunday writing as well. I'm also just about to start tutoring, because I work primarily with hardware and starting to play live. Started playing live last year. I'm going to be doing sort of like tailored tutoring to modular synthesis and incorporating hardware into your studio setup, and some Ableton tutorials as well. So that's like an avenue that I'm starting to look at and starting to build like a small customer base, I guess. Putting lessons together and working out what is the most digestible way of teaching something like that.
Okay.
And it has such a like broad, I guess, module in itself. Yeah. So yeah, that's the sort of like route that I'm going down at the moment, as opposed to also playing gigs, DJ sets and live sets.
Wicked, thank you. Chris?
I mean, because I've been doing it for so long, it's like really changed a lot over the years. But so I've initially kind of started out just like, my main income was just like gigging, and then later sort of releasing tunes, getting royalties, and the kind of traditional artist route. I think the first time I branched out into trying to sort of diversify my revenue was, I guess, doing like a bit of extra stuff, like some radio. So I did some stuff with One Extra, presenting, a little bit of money from that. But it was really kind of building DCBreaks.com, which was like an artist site, but also a retail store for selling digital products, mainly sample packs, synth preset packs. And so that's kind of always just been there, kind of ticking along. And whenever I need to, I can kind of build new products, and that's kind of grown quite well over the last few years. But yeah, at the moment I'm working here full time, mainly to students online. But I do some in-person teaching as well. I've also developed, in partnership with Dan, a software synth called Halo. So we've kind of experimented with that as well. I've done some stuff with music for computer games. Like I did some stuff with Fast and Furious franchise a few years ago. Most of which kind of came through the record label. So it's not like I don't consider myself necessarily a composer for media necessarily.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've kind of dabbled in lots of different stuff really.
Yeah.
Tutorials for various online kind of platforms like Sample Genie, creating sample packs for people like Splice. There's so many ways you can kind of monetize your skills these days. I think it's just about where you want to go with it, and I'd kind of be quite interested in doing like a Patreon. I'd love to hear more about that, because that's something that I think is really interesting as well as a producer.
Yeah. And Chris didn't mention their full-time volunteer role as parent as well, which is hugely demanding, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a big kind of inflection point for me was like the pandemic. So like just before the pandemic, we were supposed to have, in fact, our album ended up coming out during the pandemic, but it was supposed to come out around that time. In fact, the last gig I played before lockdown was our album release party in London, and it was like the worst timing. And so we had like all these shows in America booked, and obviously all that kind of fell away. And as it kind of wore on, I was thinking, how am I going to basically pay the bills? Got kids, mortgage, all the rest of it. So that's when I ended up kind of coming to work for DBS, which has been brilliant. And I think it's just important to recognise that through your career, as it goes on, you will have to navigate these different changes, whether it's starting a family or. And so, in a way, having different skills that you can kind of monetize can help give you that resilience to kind of manage with change. And something massive like a pandemic, where, before that, I was full-time music and most of my income was coming from DJing and stuff like that. To have that taken away was obviously like quite a big change for me. So, having these different things, like the website, definitely helped keeping like regular money coming through. It can kind of help you, just kind of navigate that a little bit.
Cheers. And James, portfolio at a glance.
So, pre-lockdown, which is when, I guess, lockdown was when my sort of music career sort of really took off. which is kind of a bit strange. But before that, I was working a full-time job doing carpentry. I was making music in the evening, gigging on the weekend, so I was just like completely maxed out. And then when lockdown hit, it was just a sigh of relief in a way to like, not be doing some gigs. But I was also like, I need to think about how I'm gonna make some money now, because carpentry was wearing thin because we couldn't work at certain locations.
Yep.
The guy that I was working with at the time was like, why don't you start Patreon? There was another guy called Sustenance who was doing one kind of in the shadows before Patreon was really like, well, it wasn't on my radar anyway. And I started that, and it took a while to kind of gauge how much work I want to put in for what sort of money I want to get back, because it's a tier-based monthly subscription service, if anyone doesn't know. So yeah, I started out with that, and it kind of grew very rapidly just because of the fan base that I'd have over the last 15 years. So that took off to the point where I think 6-7 months later, I quit my job in carpentry to just pursue it and see how far I could go. And then, yeah, I've been doing that for coming into my 5th year now. And then just last October, actually a year ago, October, I started doing one-to-one tuition, which is kind of like a natural progression from Patreon. So yeah, really enjoying that and kind of just pushing forward with the educational stuff whilst also writing and releasing music and trying to, well, take away some of the gigs because I don't want to be forced into every situation. Whereas before, when I was trying to make ends meet, you say yes to everything.
Yeah.
Whereas now I'm in a comfortable position where I can pick and choose the work that I want to do, which I feel very fortunate about.
Yeah. And thinking about Patreon, how much of an early adopter did you feel like coming to that platform in somewhere around like 2018, 2019?
It was 2020, so it was in lockdown that kind of came about. Yeah, it was kind of interesting because I'd never wanted to become a teacher. Like Andy, when we were in Amoss, he started doing some one-to-one tuition, and I was just like, no way, because I never went to a music college. I never got taught how to do this, so everything was self-taught, and I was like, no one wants to learn how I speak about making a bass line because I don't know the official names, all of this stuff. But then as it kind of went along and I got a lot of confidence through it, and everyone was like, I'm learning more from you than I am my university course. And I was like, okay, cool. That's like a really powerful thing to hear.
Yeah.
And now, like, if I meet people at gigs, it's kind of crazy because before they'd be like, oh, I love your music. And now they're like, I love your Patreon. And it's such a niche thing of what I do that now that's just given me so much more confidence and kind of really boosted me into one-to-one tuition.
Yeah.
I also did a lecture here a couple of years ago, which was something that was really cool to do as well. Just great experiences, kind of just sharing knowledge that I thought was just the wrong way to teach something, and realizing that I actually have some real useful knowledge for people.
Yeah, but people really valued that, even if you didn't immediately recognize that.
Yeah.
Sick.
Yeah, a lot of self-worth growing over the last few years.
Yeah, acceptance of your skill set and your capacity, your ability. And would anyone share a moment in their career where something went from being a side project or a passion project to being something that was actually starting to that you could consider as a revenue stream or an income?
Yeah, well, in lockdown is when Dan and I started developing Halo, which is like a hybrid synth sampler Rompler plugin. And the idea for it really came about because we'd been developing sample packs and synth preset packs for DCBreaks.com. But we were kind of getting a bit bored with like just making like another serum pack or another drum pack, whatever it was. So we're like, we need to kind of make something that's a bit different. And so Dan came up with this idea of a sampler that was kind of loaded with DC Breaks sounds that you could kind of manipulate in different ways. And so he kind of basically got stuck into like the coding side of it and learning how to basically build something like that. And again, going back to that idea of collaborating and having different strengths, that was like not remotely interesting to me at all. But what I enjoyed doing was like designing the graphic user interface, doing the sound design for it. And so as the kind of months rolled by, first of all, it was great to have another project that was not music and, kind of got us through that weird time. But as it kind of developed, we were actually like, oh my God, this is actually like really good. Like we had no idea we could make something so cool. And it was, we started thinking, well, we could sell this on like Plugin Boutique or, where are we going to, how are we going to pitch it? And it became like a whole, it just kind of snowballed and became this whole extra project that we realized actually could be quite a good little money spinner. So, that was.
Yeah. And when when that project started, was it in your heads as, hey, this is something we're doing for the love of it, or this is something we're doing that people would pay money for and would be really valuable in that sense?
I mean, we went into it hoping to make a digital product that we would sell, but we didn't know what that would look like whether it would be like a £5-10 little almost gimmicky thing. It ended up becoming, I think our starting price was £60, like it was a substantial piece of software. And we were trying to pitch it, not at kind of the high-end like Serum or something like that, like that everyone uses, but it's also not kind of entry-level sort of, too sort of simple or gimmicky. So it was one of those things that just kind of evolved almost, and with any software you kind of develop it and you kind of refine it and sort of bug test it and create new versions, and it's still something that's kind of evolving. But yeah, at the start we didn't really necessarily know where it was going to go or really how to do it. We had no idea. Dan had never done coding before. I'd never thought about GUI like design for a plugin before, and so yeah, it just kind of evolved organically, I guess.
Wicked.
And we had the time to do it.
Yeah.